And so I think focus on the task at hand is so important because it's what leads you in those big moments to be ready. Because it's like, man, I've done these different things. Again, going back to discipline, when they were supposed to happen and how they were supposed to happen. But focus can be so difficult for on the more positive end because we're focused on the big where we want to be, or on the negative end, we're focused on what is wrong, as you said, the pain that we're going through because, man, I'm doing everything I can, but it's not happening.
Hey guys, welcome to the Troy Gramling Podcast. I hope you're having an incredible day, whether you're just getting it started or you're well into it. Here in South Florida, just like everywhere else in the United States, it is football season. Now, there's a little difference down here because football season doesn't mean cool weather. It means hot weather, but still football season. And I don't know when you're watching this, but our Hurricanes won. And I think
Notre Dame.
they all won, didn't they?
I don't know.
Well, you got your computer there. Look it up.
You know what? We've got the technology.
I do think not all of our Florida teams, but I think Florida, the Gators, the Seminoles, and the Hurricanes, I think they all.
The Gators did win.
I think they all won. So it was a big weekend here in South Florida.
And FSU beat Bama.
So anyways, I hope you guys had just as much luck as we did wherever you may be watching from. If you're a college football fan, we're not going to talk about the NFL. It's been a little bit challenging down south here in the state of Florida. But I am glad you're with us today because we're going to talk about success. We're going to talk about winning, and we're going to talk probably to the most successful football. We're not going to talk to him, but we're going to talk about what he shared with us at the Global Leadership Summit just about a month ago. So Nick Saban is his name, and Carson Luke is your name. Welcome to the podcast. And
Yes.
I know this is one of those things that really challenged you, and so you're going to share a little bit with us, and let's walk through what he called the ladder of success.
Yes. So, like you said at GLS, he spoke about this, and this is something that he's talked about several times in interviews and podcasts. It's always interesting to hear what the best people do, especially when, some of the best are good at explaining how they got there. Some aren't as good at explaining it. But when they have a system of like how they think about how, they got to where they were, it's always interesting to break that down. So he calls his the ladder to success. And it's a popular leadership discussion that he's had several times. But it's basically, should you climb this ladder, starting with the very bottom, it will lead to success. And before we even jump into it, I wanted to throw a question about that. Everyone's got their leadership plans as far as, if you do this, if you do that, it leads to success. And what I think is interesting is it's not necessarily the plan, but it's who you become as you climb that ladder. There's really no way to create, if you do these things isolated, like, what do you call it? Like insulary? Is that a word? I feel like it is. Insulary experiences. It's more about who you become in the process of climbing that ladder, that by the time you get to that final step, you're now a very different person than you previously were. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's a good, and I think discipleship, leadership, all those things are about changing and transforming who we are, and who we are will determine, what we experience.
Right. Absolutely. So the bottom of the ladder, where it starts, is have a vision. It says the ladder begins with a clear vision of what you want to accomplish. For Saban's teams, this meant understanding the level of performance required to be a champion. It's important to have a vision. Where am I trying to go? What am I trying to accomplish? Now, this is, for some, I would say easier. For some, more difficult, depending on how you're wired. Are you a dreamer? Is it easy to think about the future? But where I feel like everyone can hit a roadblock is how does this join? How does the vision I have for my life, what I want to accomplish, how does that join with what my company's trying to accomplish, what my family needs to accomplish, right? It's not life isn't just about me, right? It's not just about what I want to do, but how does that fit together with all the other uh, entities that I'm a part of? And so, as a leader, how do you join your vision and others' vision into the bigger picture?
I think, again, if you help whoever the leader or the organization is accomplish what they feel called to do, that's going to open up doors of opportunity. So rather than seeing them, go now, if you're going in total opposite directions, you're probably at the wrong place.
Right.
But if you're a son or a daughter in a home, if you help mom and dad succeed, you're going to get more opportunities. If you're at a church or you're at a business and, you have your vision, maybe you want to write a song or, produce a movie and maybe the church or business you're at doesn't want that's not part of their vision.
Right.
But as you help them accomplish their vision, you'll be surprised at the doors of opportunity that open for you. So I think it's thinking through that. What can you learn along the way that can help you in the future accomplish what God's called you to do? It takes great patience. That's the hardest part, right? You get a vision, people get a vision, they immediately want to accomplish it.
Yeah.
It's like, and I'm called to do this if you're a Christian or,
Right.
whatever it might be. And too many times I think we miss the door of opportunity because we're trying to force something as
Yeah.
opposed to so I would just encourage anybody that's listening or watching today to think about how can I help those around me accomplish their vision. John Maxwell used to always say, how do you add value to the people around you?
Mm.
And even though their vision doesn't seem, like at all what you feel called to do or want to do or whatever. I just think a success has an amazing way of opening doors of opportunity.
Yeah.
And they're hard to see when they're not there. A
Right.
lot of times they're hidden doors or behind bookcases and those kind of things. But when you help people, like, I know when I came here, I didn't come here to be the lead pastor here. But as I helped Pastor Dan, and I had no idea that he was, you know, praying and thinking through leaving and traveling and doing those things. But as I helped him accomplish his vision, what God was calling him to do and the church, they were in the process of this building and all of that. Then the door of opportunity opened up that I could have never seen. And it would have
Yeah.
been real easy to have gotten frustrated and said, okay, I've learned what I need to learn. Now let me go do my thing. And, and sometimes that's what you're supposed to do. But I just encourage folks not to, the worst thing you can do is try to take over or lead in a different direction,
Yeah.
because then you're positioning yourself in a place, especially as a believer, to not be
Yeah.
to not be blessed. And if you're at an organization that, is not Christian, you're putting yourself in a place to get fired. So,
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think there is a certain level of maturity we have to have when it comes to vision. Like you said, of understanding it's not my bosses, it's not my CEO, whatever it is, it's not their responsibility to always align the entire organization's vision with what I want to accomplish. If my vision doesn't align with it, I think it's important that we ask those questions, have the maturity to ask those questions, and have the maturity to make the decisions that are needed because of that. It's always tough when someone sticks around knowing that they don't fit. And instead of, I'm going to find a place where the vision is aligned, it's like, I want to try and change the vision of this place. You know what I mean? We can absolutely get into a mindset where my vision is the right vision. And we start to try and change. And you can see that with families as well, right? Where it's like, hey, this is where we need to go, even though it's not necessarily what's best for the family. It can easily become that kind of situation. So the next step on that ladder.
just before you
Yeah,
get
yeah.
there, the two things that came to my mind. One is, as Christians, sometimes, that's where we use the God card.
Yeah,
It's unfair. 'Cause,
absolutely.
you're like you said,
God
my
told
vision's the right vision because God told me. And then the other thing I would say is sometimes visions are so large you can't get to the next step. In other words, it's like the vision has to be when you get to this next, there has to be you have to be able to reach the next rung, you might want to
Right.
say, on the ladder. Like if I have a vision to change the world, right? Well, I might want to break that down so I can reach the next rung
Right.
of that vision.
Absolutely. Well, and sometimes those big, big visions are more than anything, they're what keep you in the fight, more than the North Star that you are constantly looking at, which we'll kind of get to as we get or further up, I guess, this ladder. The next one is the next step on that ladder is create a process. You must then create a detailed plan or the process, which is what Coach Saban, calls it, that outlines the steps needed to achieve that vision. This plan focuses on controllable elements like daily habits, effort, and attention to detail, not on the uncontrollable final score. And so it's this idea that, okay, we know what we want to accomplish. Now we need to have a process. We need to have a plan on how are we going to get there? What's going to lead to that? And I think for me, this is where I have struggled with this. Oh, there's a lot of areas I've struggled with this. But one in particular is trying to have too perfect of a plan. Like I'm like, well, I don't know if that's going to get me there. And it's like, well, but a process will get me closer to the vision than no process. You know what I mean? Like while this may not be perfect, it's going to get you closer.
Right.
It's kind of like, let's say you want to get in shape and you don't want to work out until you have the perfect form, you know exactly how many reps, and it's like, well, getting to the gym and hitting the treadmill may not be flashy, it may not even be the best, but it's definitely better than not going at all, right? And so for me, the process really it really important about it is, you can start it immediately, not once everything's together, not once things are figured out. It's not really supposed to be perfect. I think plans have to be flexible and evolve as you evolve. Um, right now, I've been training for a Ironman, half Ironman race next year. And when I first started, the plan was rough. It was just what I would come up with. And so it was whatever felt right. But as I've learned more about it, as I've gotten better in that field, the plan's become much more specific. It's become a lot more beneficial. But I think it's so important. I think that the plan can easily trip us up because we wait until it's the perfect plan rather than, hey, this is a plan that I can start with.
Yeah, and sometimes we start too big, and what I mean
Yeah,
by that is, if you're eating whatever you want and you're gonna start on Monday eating totally healthy, whereas people aren't gonna be able to keep that up.
absolutely.
We wanna do that, right? We don't like the way we feel, we don't like the way we're eating, and we wanna get healthy, and we wanna
Yeah,
do it as fast as we can, but very few people have I seen be able to do that, where you
right,
go from, eating pizza to eating salads. Usually if there's a process involved. I think the other thing is thinking through the complexity of whatever it is you're leading. Nick Saban is leading the football team,
right.
right? So he wants to build let's say a championship team or whatever.
Hmm.
Well, he's not the president of the school, so he's not so much worried about, is everybody getting a degree,
Yeah,
and, about the dorm rooms and the buildings. So you can think that as your leadership responsibility goes up, the complexity increases.
yeah,
So the president, let's say, of the university at the time, or, you know well, I'm sure they wanted to have a winning football team, and so their process was more, "How do we hire the right person?"
yeah,
as opposed to all the things that had to be done
absolutely.
to build that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to kinda think through that process. As what I'm leading gets larger and becomes more complex, that system, um, is still just as important. In some ways, I think it's not as personal in this, like he's talking about, how do you build a winning football player? And if you're the president of the school, right, you're thinking about how do you got to build a football player, and you got to build an academic dean, and you got to build
Yep.
a facilities people, and somebody's got to raise the money. And so, and again, I don't think that's an excuse. I just think it's thinking, through those kind of things as you think about the process.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good. It goes on to the next step, which is have the discipline to execute. This is the most difficult but most crucial step. It requires doing what you were supposed to do when you were supposed to do it, the way it's supposed to be done, even when you don't feel like it. And I think that, I mean, this is so true, right? The idea that you can have all the plans you want, but at a certain point, there comes a time when it's like, okay, it's time to put, hammer to nail. It's time to get out there, get the work done, and do what needs to be done. Um, and I think it's really important. It says there, um, doing what you were supposed to do when you were supposed to do it, and how it's the way it's supposed to be done. I think it's sometimes easy to feel discipline because we're doing what we're supposed to, but we're not always doing it when we're supposed to.
Mm.
And even more so, I would say we're not doing it the way it's supposed to be done. And I think that is discipline is just so much bigger than doing things. Like, and I think that, again, I've just been tripped up in my mind before where I think that because I'm doing a lot of things, I'm disciplined, but those things aren't necessarily always being done the way they're supposed to be done. And I think that's that next level. You talk a whole lot here at Potential Church, with the team about excellence. And, how do you see, um, as far as excellence versus just doing a lot of things? How do you look at discipline when it comes to those 2 areas?
But I think, if you go back to what's the vision and what's the process, and being disciplined in the things that are going to, move you towards that is important. I think you got to begin with yourself.
Yeah,
Right? I can't force you to be disciplined per se, but I can start with myself. I can model it. I think that's important. And I think even with that, some things we call discipline, but we just like it.
yeah,
Some people like to
that's
get up
true.
early. Some people like to go to the gym. Some people, like some of those things. So I do think that, discipline bleeds. So you can either way, right? If I'm undisciplined in one area, it can bleed into other areas of my life. If I'm disciplined in one area, it can. And so you got to start with yourself. But then helping other people be disciplined is, um, even more challenging in a way because you don't want to be the drill sergeant, telling everybody exactly what they've, got to do. But
Right.
there is that sense that if we don't do the right things at the right time in the right way, we're not going to succeed. And I think that's hard. You, you know, uh, Especially when you're first beginning or you've got a downturn and you're trying to figure out what what excellence is important. You know what I'm saying? Like, um, is it that your shirt doesn't have any spots, or is it that the trash is picked up on
Right.
the property? You know what I mean? There's
Mhm.
because again, there's always priorities.
Yeah.
So you have to figure out what's the priority of excellence because there's a limited amount of time and there's a limited amount of resources, money and people,
Mm.
and you only got so much time.
Yeah.
So on the property, what's the most important thing to be at the highest level of excellence? You want to do everything with that. You don't want to do anything
Right.
not with excellence, but there's certain things that get painted and other things that don't get painted. Let's
Right.
say if it's a facility, it's like, so if you haven't taken time to determine, well, what is that most important thing, and for me, it's the most important thing is just the mindset, is that people are looking for opportunities to express excellence and are somewhat frustrated by the lack of, the ability to do that,
Yeah.
either time um, or money, as opposed to looking for excuses to why.
Yeah.
Because that's the most natural thing, right? I don't have the money, I don't have the time, I don't have the staff, I don't have the technology, I don't have, I do it excellent. And it's like, well, over here you got time, money, and staff, but it's not done excellent either.
Right.
So,
Absolutely. Well, and, I think, something that you've been talking about quite a bit with the staff, you also talked about it on the live show, is the idea of pain and things hurting more than I think maybe we thought it was going to. And discipline, I mean, is pain, right? Like there's no way around it. Like And I think that's an important what can differentiate between things that we like to do, as you said, versus what's truly discipline. It requires us to experience some form of pain because we don't want to do it or because it's hard to do, because it hurts to do. Um, in the book Go One More by Nick Bear, he talks about how he does one incredibly difficult physical challenge a year. And it's that idea for himself that it's really easy to get locked into because he loves being a CEO in his business. It's easy for him to get locked into, well, I'm just going to pour into that this year, but it doesn't require the same pain. He doesn't have to go through necessarily the same amount of pain. Whereas that physical challenge always hurts, no matter what season of life he's in. Um, and so I just think it's important that that can be that kind of sign for us of okay, this is going to require some discipline because I know it's going to hurt.
And pain is different. There's the pain of the process.
Hmm.
If you're gonna run a long
Right.
marathon, that's just gonna be painful. And so the discipline to train and do what needs to be done. But there's also the pain of, I don't know how you would what terminology, but the idea of, let's say you run the race, but you never finish it
Yeah.
because you can't, let's say. Let's just say physically you can't, you're trying to run a 6-minute mile, and let's say you just can't do it. The pain of continuing to run when you're not hitting your mark,
Yeah.
right? Because you're never gonna get there if you stop running,
Right.
but I think we forget about that pain sometimes. It's working on your marriage when it doesn't seem to be succeeding, and no matter what you do, it doesn't seem to work, or your teenager seems to continue to be rebellious, or the church or company doesn't seem to wanna grow. It's easy then to kinda settle in, and you can still kinda do things per se with excellence, but you're no longer taking the risk. You're no longer, thinking, because you don't wanna feel the pain of
Yeah.
not fulfilling in, the moment what you want to fulfill. So
Yeah.
to me, there's both sides of that.
Absolutely. Um, the next step on the ladder is focus on the task at hand, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And he's got what do you call that? Where it's like letters that
Acrostic?
something like that. But yeah, so he's got the acronym
I don't know.
WIN, anyways, is the word. And he encourages his players to ask what's important now. So, WIN. And the idea is what do you need to focus on right in this very moment? And again, I think this is where someone who's a dreamer can get caught up is constantly thinking about where I want to be that we miss what do I need to do now?
Mm.
Because what you want to do now often is not flashy. It's not, the masses aren't watching you in this very moment, right? And I've heard several coaches talk about the idea that on game day, there's no more training. Really, that should be the most enjoyable because now it's just all the work we put in is just it's going to play out. There's nothing more you can do now. Outside of being in the right mindset, intensity, those kinds of things. But that's not going to win you the game if you haven't put in the work beforehand. And so I think focus on the task at hand is so important because it's what leads you in those big moments to be ready. Because it's like, man, I've done these different things. Again, going back to discipline, when they were supposed to happen and how they were supposed to happen. Um, but focus can be so difficult for on the more positive end because we're focused on the big where we want to be, or on the negative end, we're focused on what is wrong, as you said, the pain that we're going through because, man, I'm doing everything I can, but it's not happening, and I think that one of the things that I don't want to say it's not talked about enough because people talk about it all the time, but it still feels like it's not enough, is how long it takes. It's easy to think of this ladder as like, okay, each month I'm going to take another step and, in 6 to 8 months, I'll be at the top.
Right.
And life just it doesn't work that way. Um, where I thought I was going to be in the, the ministry that I have, I've been doing it for nearly a decade now. Where I thought I was going to be is very different than where I am. And not because, oh, I was, always lazy. I
Right.
never did. I made mistakes, but it just takes way longer than you think it's going to. And so it can be really hard. What are some ways that you found to focus on what is at hand?
I think reminding yourself of that, it's like Nick Saban, he was a Dolphin coach, that didn't go real well. So he had to, find the right time and the right place. I
Right.
think, to me, that's important. And then I think if you're disciplined, if you do the rung before that and your discipline is strong, then you just have to discipline your mind.
Yeah.
I'm not going to think about what could happen. I'm not going to let my mind go to a place that's distracting from what I'm doing in the moment.
Yeah.
And, so, that's just that's a decision, an act of the will,
Yeah.
that I think, continuing to remind myself of how important what I'm focusing on today is to future success and not allow the distractions. And then making yourself accountable to the people around you so they can speak into your life and say, hey, you seem distracted today, or, you seem discouraged today, or whatever it might be.
Right.
So they can kind of call it out and get you. That's what coaches do, right? They
Right.
blow the whistle, they make you run, whatever. Say, you're not thinking, you're not focused on what we're doing today, so you're not improving.
Yeah.
And in life, that's easy. You got a bunch of stuff going on at one time. Those listening might have dating relationships or college or marriage or kids or money or a lot of stuff. And yet they're, focusing right now on growing and learning. And, if you're not careful, some folks have listened to this and haven't heard a word we said.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because their mind's on something else.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. I remember hearing Arnold talk about, winning Mr. Olympia, all the times he did and everything that went into that. But he would talk about how he felt like one of the biggest differences was not just work ethic, but when he was working out, he was focused on what he was doing and nothing else. That muscle, making sure he could feel the connection. And he would talk about how everyone else was in the gym just as much as he was, all those guys. But it was his focus that he believed led him to that next level. And I just think that's so important, especially in today's world. Um, there's a lot of competition. There are people who are putting in just as many hours or more, what I mean, depending on what life season you're at. If you've got kids and a family, there is only so much time. And so what I think can be the differential between, you and the competition is that focus of I'm totally locked into what I'm doing. The next step is develop a championship mindset. It says this means having pride in performance, holding yourself to a high standard of excellence in everything you do on and off the field. Requires investing your time wisely rather than just spending it. Anything about that?
yeah, I just think be the owner.
Yeah.
It might not be your office, it's the business,
Yeah.
but own it. It might not be your microphone. But if you think of yourself as the owner, then you're going to own that responsibility,
Right.
right? And that's what leads to success,
Yeah.
is to think of yourself in that way. Too many times it's like, well, it's not it's not, I don't have the right camera, so it's not my fault. Or,
Right.
as opposed to saying, no, I'm the owner of this podcast, or I'm the owner of this,
Yeah.
whatever it is you're doing.
Absolutely. Anytime you're watching a game, especially a game that has some significance, you can see the guys who, this means this is everything, win or lose. Um, and you can see the ones who don't feel like they're going to carry as much weight
Mm,
over a win or a loss. And I think that really isn't necessarily about skill or talent, but more so about just, like you said, being an owner.
right.
Um, And then the very last step is embrace continuous improvement. This process is not a journey with an endpoint, but a cycle of continuous growth. Saban famously rejected complacency, teaching that once you achieve success, you must immediately focus on what it takes to earn the next victory. That idea that there is no endpoint. I was listening to Jordan Peterson's podcast, and I forget the guest he had on, but they were talking about how as humans were created in such a way that were made for the journey, the
Mm,
process, that we actually fall apart. And there was a study done. Forgive me, I'm gonna butcher it, so I'm not gonna try and say it. But there was basically a study done of really successful men who, once they retired, their lives fell apart.
mm,
And it was just so interesting how, these are men who have been disciplined, who have worked really hard, and now they're in, cheating on their spouses and just self destructing. And the belief there was because there was no more mountain that they were trying to climb. There wasn't this thing that they were trying to strive for. And I think that that is true, that, man, it's got to constantly be looking forward at what's the next thing to accomplish. Because it is, that the journey, the process, um, that's really the enjoyable part, even more so than achieving whatever it is we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and the more success you have, the smaller the increments. And what I mean by that is, it's like when kids are young, and you haven't seen them in a while, and they've learned to tie their shoe and they've
Yeah.
learned to talk and walk. I mean, they've made these huge,
Yeah.
strides. Well, the older they get, they're still growing, but it's a smaller step.
Yeah.
And I think as leaders, or in our marriage, in our business, in our churches, it's kind of the same way. The first time you read a leadership book, it's like, wow, look at all this incredible stuff. The next book you read, 60% of it was in the first book,
Yeah.
and it's easy to put it down. But if you continue to read, then maybe you pick up a little bit. And then
Yeah.
as you go, right? It's not that those, need to continue to learn. There's so much to learn. There's so much you don't know, but there is a lot now that you do know.
Yeah.
And it's easy sometimes to stop there as to continuing to, and especially if you're not having the success you want to have.
Yeah.
It's like, because, the number one thing, even, the first book, sometimes it's like, well, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Right, it's like the person that I work out, I eat right, and I can't lose weight, you know what I mean? And it's just like, and I think the same thing happens in every aspect of our life. You said it earlier, it takes a lot longer than any of us think, and it's so easy to get discouraged. And even though you've had success, and therefore you're enjoying a certain level of success, um, the cost doesn't change. It looks different, but the cost doesn't
Yeah.
change. There's still a price to be paid to go to the next level.
Absolutely. And I think, it's when you look at this ladder to success, um, it's a higher cost as you go up that ladder.
Mm.
The higher up you are on the ladder, the more that you have to lose should you fall
Right.
off of it. And I think that, you often will see people stuck at certain points on that ladder where it's, man, that next step is just, it's too much. It costs too much. Um, but the unfortunate thing is you really can't stay where you're at.
Right.
It's either a decision to continue to ascend or to start your descent. But there's no, I'm just going to stay. I'm good here,
Huh.
And I think that's the challenge. But with the right, vision, process, discipline, I think it gets you on the right step. And like I said, I do believe that you start to become someone who is able to attack. Obviously, there's parts of leadership that are not mentioned in this ladder, but it's through this process that you become someone who can handle those kinds of situations. You know what I mean? Who can handle the pain of a lot of this. He even mentions in some of them, worry about the things you can control. But I mean, it's a reality. There's several things we can't control that have a big impact on us. But I think it's who you become in this process that helps you deal with those things.
Yeah. And that will always happen.
Yeah.
Right. That's a success we can all trust in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I may not make the $1,000,000 or whatever it is
Exactly.
I'm pursuing, change the world, but I will be transformed in a
Yeah.
positive way. And I can add value to the lives of others. So those are two things we can all celebrate no matter
Absolutely.
where we find ourselves. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in today. And I hope Nick Saban's ladder, if you're not on it, it's time to take that first step and dream. Give yourself permission to dream, whether it be about your profession or your finances or your spiritual life or your relationships. Take a moment or two today and dream what might be and discipline your mind from telling yourself you can't.
Yeah.
Right? That's the reason we wrote the book, Potential, the Uncontainable Power of God Within You. If you haven't picked up a copy, let me encourage you to do that. And if you heard something today that inspired you or encouraged you and you think it might help somebody else, it's just a click of the button. You talk about adding value. We've never lived at a time where it's easier to add value to the people around us. And one of the ways to do that is to just Share it with somebody you care about. Leave us a comment. Tell us some of the things that you have learned along the way. And even if you're an Alabama hater, we want to hear. We want to hear what you got to say. And if you haven't subscribed, we're at 30,000. We'd love to get to the big 50, right? Before I turn 60, I want to get to 50.
Amen.
How about that? You can help us out by hitting subscribe, share it with somebody, and don't forget, we will be back next Thursday. And we're starting on September the 10th. Why don't you come have lunch with us in the break room? We're going to do a live stream every Wednesday, high noon. Just kind of hang out, build community, have some fun, play a few games, catch our breath in the middle of the day. That's starting September the 10th. It's every Wednesday at high noon. We'll see you next week right here on the Troy Gramling Podcast. Have a great day. God bless.